The vast emptiness of space had never felt so tense. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Olive Branch, watching as the delegation of Zix representatives fidgeted with their translation devices. Their scaled skin shimmered under the artificial lighting, four eyes blinking in different patterns, a sign of nervousness in their species. The humans had been at war with the Krell Dominion for nearly 3 years now, and the Zix Confederation had finally agreed to formal talks about a potential alliance. "They're late," muttered Commander Rick Torres, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. Not exactly making a great first impression. Sarah nodded but kept her expression neutral. The Zix ambassador, Vexlar, tilted his elongated head toward her. "Your reinforcements. They are truly coming." His translator rendered his clicks and whistles into smooth English, though the uncertainty in his voice needed no translation. "They'll be here," Sarah assured him, even as she fought back her own doubts. The Admiralty had promised a show of force, something to convince the Zix that humanity wasn't just holding its own against the Krell, but winning. The Zix only respected strength, and theoretical discussions of Earth's military capabilities wouldn't cut it. They needed to see. A junior officer burst into the observation deck, breathing hard. "Captain, they've arrived." The tension in Sarah's shoulders eased slightly. Right on time, then. As if on cue, the vastness of space before them shimmered with the telltale distortion of a jump gate opening. First came the escort frigates, sleek and predatory, moving into defensive formations with practiced precision. Then, emerging from the artificial rift like some ancient leviathan rising from the depths, came the UES Thunderchild. Even Sarah, who had reviewed the specifications countless times, felt her breath catch. The human battleship was massive, easily 4 times the size of the Olive Branch. Its hull was a dark, matte black that seemed to devour the light from nearby stars, broken only by the pulsing blue glow of its engines and weapon ports. Angular and threatening, it looked less like a vessel built by engineers and more like a predator evolved specifically for war. The Zix delegation fell completely silent. All 16 of their collective eyes were fixed on the behemoth that now dominated the viewport. "By the first nest," whispered Vexlar, his translator struggling to convey the mixture of awe and horror in his voice. "You built this." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "The Thunderchild is our newest Valkyrie-class battleship. She carries enough firepower to glass a small moon, point defense systems that can track and eliminate targets moving at relativistic speeds, and armor plating developed using metallurgical techniques your scientists probably haven't even theorized yet." This was, of course, a carefully calculated exaggeration, but not by much. Human military technology had made quantum leaps forward since the Krell had destroyed the colony on New Eden. Nothing like a genocidal alien empire to accelerate research and development. The communications officer's console chimed. "Captain, Admiral Zhao is requesting visual contact." "On screen," Sarah ordered, straightening her uniform. The central display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Helen Zhao, commander of the 7th Fleet and the Thunderchild's battle group. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and the decorations on her uniform spoke of decades of service. "Captain Chen," she said with a nod, "I trust our arrival has made the appropriate impression on our potential allies." "Yes, Admiral." The Zix delegation seems impressed. Zhou's expression remained serious, but Sarah caught the slight twinkle in her eye. "Good. The Thunderchild will remain on station during negotiations. We've also brought the technical specifications and battle records you requested. The Zix should find them. Educational." Vexlar stepped forward, drawing himself up to his full height, which still left him a head shorter than Sarah. "Admiral, we had heard reports of human military advancements, but we dismissed them as exaggerations. I see now we were mistaken." Zhao inclined her head slightly. "A common error when dealing with humans, Ambassador. We tend to exceed expectations." The meeting continued with formal introductions, But Sarah noticed the changed demeanor of the Zix delegation. Where before there had been skepticism and condescension, now there was cautious respect. The arrival of the Thunderchild had shifted the dynamic of the negotiations before they'd even begun. Later, as the diplomatic teams settled into detailed discussions in the conference room, Sarah found herself back at the observation deck with Vexillar. The Zix ambassador stared at the human battleship, all four of his eyes blinking in an irregular pattern. "You know," he said quietly, "when the Krell began their expansion, they offered the Zix Confederation the same choice they offered all species: submit or be exterminated. Many thought we should submit." Sarah remained silent, letting him continue. "The Krell showed us recordings of what happened to those who resisted. Worlds burning. Species extinct within days." Vexillar turned all four eyes toward her. "Then we heard about Earth, a single, isolated planet that not only fought back, but started winning. Many of my people didn't believe it possible." "We're stubborn that way," Sarah said with a slight smile. "It's more than stubbornness," Vexillar replied. "The Krell have conquered 17 starfaring civilizations. None lasted more than a standard galactic year against them. Yet here you stand, a species that had barely reached your own moon when the Zix first achieved faster-than-light travel." He gestured toward the Thunderchild. "And now you build this, a weapon that makes the Krell battlecruisers look like toys." His translator couldn't quite capture the complexity of his next sound, something between wonder and fear. How did you advance so quickly?" Sarah considered the question carefully. How to explain humanity's unique relationship with conflict. How to convey that humans had been preparing for this moment long before they knew it was coming, through countless stories of alien invasions and last stands against overwhelming odds. "When the Krell destroyed New Eden," she said finally, "they killed 2 million human colonists. Men, women, children. They expected us to cower, to negotiate, perhaps to submit as others had done." She turned her gaze back to the Thunderchild, its dark hull now illuminated by the light of a distant sun. "Instead, they united us, every nation, every faction. All of humanity focused on one goal. The unspoken question hung between them. What would happen if that unified human focus ever turned toward the Zix Confederation?" The ambassador seemed to read her thoughts. "The Krell believe they are the apex predators of the galaxy," Vexillar said quietly. "I think perhaps they have never encountered a true predator until now." As if in response, the Thunderchild's massive weapon ports began to glow with energy, just a systems check, but the timing made it seem like a silent affirmation of the ambassador's words. The display of power sent a clear message rippling across the stars. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they had come armed for war. The meeting adjourned 3 hours later, with the Zix delegation visibly shaken but intrigued. As they filed out toward their shuttle, Sarah caught Commander Torres watching them with narrowed eyes. "You don't trust them," she observed quietly. Torres shrugged. "I fought at Proxima Centauri, saw what the Krell did firsthand. Anyone who waited this long to pick a side. I have questions." Sarah understood his skepticism. The Battle of Proxima had been humanity's first major victory, but at a terrible cost. Nearly 30% of Earth's fleet destroyed, and Torres had lost his previous ship, the Dauntless. Only 43 of her crew of 300 had made it to the escape pods. "The Zix are pragmatists," Sarah replied. "They've survived this long by playing all sides. But that strategy won't work much longer, and they know it." Before Torres could respond, Sarah's comm unit chimed. "Captain Chin, Admiral Joe requests your presence aboard the Thunderchild." Immediately, Sarah raised an eyebrow. This wasn't part of the planned itinerary. 20 minutes later, a shuttle carried her across the void between the diplomatic vessel and the massive battleship. Up close, the Thunderchild was even more imposing, a monument to humanity's determination to survive. As the shuttle approached, Sarah could make out the missile batteries, rail gun emplacements, and the distinctive housing of the quantum displacement cannon, a weapon theorized for decades, but only recently made possible by reverse engineering Krell technology. The shuttle bay swallowed her craft with room to spare. Inside, a junior officer was waiting at attention. "Lieutenant David Park, ma'am. The Admiral is waiting in the war room." Sarah followed him through corridors bustling with activity. The Thunderchild carried a crew of over 3,000, and everywhere she looked, she saw the focused intensity that had become characteristic of humanity's military since the war began. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation, just the quiet efficiency of people who understood exactly what was at stake. The war room was a stark contrast to the diplomatic niceties of the olive branch. Holographic displays showed real-time updates from a dozen fronts across 3 sectors. Admiral Zhou stood at the center table, surrounded by her senior staff, all looking at a projection of what appeared to be sensor data. "Captain Chen," Zhou acknowledged without looking up, "your diplomatic efforts may have just become more urgent." Sarah approached the table. "What am I looking at?" "Admiral, long-range sensor data from our forward listening posts near the Perseus Arm. The Krell are mobilizing their 7th subjugation fleet. Initial trajectory analysis suggests they're heading toward Zix territory." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "They know about the negotiations," Zhao nodded grimly. "They've had spies in the Zix Confederation for years. Our intelligence suggests the Krell leadership is concerned about the possibility of an alliance. They're moving to eliminate that possibility by force. How long do the Zix have? At current speed, the Krell fleet will reach their home system in approximately 16 days. The Zix military is adequate for peacetime border disputes, but against a dedicated Krell assault." Zhao shook her head. "They'll be overwhelmed within hours." Sarah understood the implications immediately. "Unless we intervene." "Precisely." Zhao finally looked up, fixing Sarah with an intense gaze. "The decision has already been made at the highest levels. The 7th Fleet will deploy to Zix Prime. We're going to make a stand there." The strategic logic was clear. If humanity allowed the Zix to fall, they would not only lose a potential ally, but also give the Krell access to additional resources and a staging ground closer to Earth's colonies. But the risk was enormous. Committing a significant portion of humanity's fleet to defend an alien civilization that had, until now, been neutral at best. "Does the Zix delegation know?" Sarah asked. "Not yet. That's where you come in." Zhou straightened up. "You've established a rapport with Ambassador Vexlar. I need you to inform him of the situation and our decision to intervene. But more importantly, I need you to secure full cooperation from the Zix military. We'll need access to their defense grid, their communications network, and their strategic facilities. With respect, Admiral, that's asking a lot. The Zix are notoriously protective of their military infrastructure, even among their allies." "We're not asking, Captain," Zhao interrupted. "We're risking human lives to save their civilization. Make it clear that our help comes with conditions." Sarah nodded, understanding the impossible position she was being placed in. She was a diplomat, trained to find common ground and build bridges. Now she was being asked to deliver an ultimatum: accept human military control or face extinction alone. As she turned to leave, Admiral Zhao added, "One more thing, Captain. Our intelligence suggests there might be more to the Zix than they've revealed. There are inconsistencies in their account of previous encounters with the Krell. Keep your eyes open." The shuttle ride back to the olive branch gave Sarah time to organize her thoughts. The scope of what was happening threatened to overwhelm her. 16 days until a Krell fleet arrived at Zix Prime. The Thunderchild and its battle group accelerating to intercept. And somewhere in the midst of it all, secrets the Zix weren't sharing. When she arrived back at the diplomatic vessel, she found Ambassador Vexlar waiting for her in the conference room. All 4 of his eyes tracked her as she entered, and his posture was rigid even by Zix standards. "Your Admiral's ship has begun activating its weapon systems," he said without preamble. "Are we to understand this as a threat, Captain Chen?" Sarah took a deep breath. This conversation had just become infinitely more complicated. "Not a threat to you, Ambassador," she replied carefully. "But we need to talk about the Krell 7th Subjugation Fleet that's currently on its way to your home world." All four of Vexillar's eyes widened, then narrowed in rapid succession, a sign of extreme distress in his species. "How could you possibly know that?" he whispered. And in that moment, Sarah realized that Admiral Zhao had been right. The Zix had known about the coming Krell attack. They had known, and they hadn't shared that information during the negotiations. The question was, what else were they hiding? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Sarah watched as the ambassador's secondary breathing vents fluttered rapidly, a physiological response the Zix couldn't control. Fear, guilt, or both. "We received intelligence 3 days ago," Vexillar finally admitted. "But our analysts weren't certain of the Krell fleet's destination." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though she didn't believe him for a second. "And you didn't think this information might be relevant to our negotiations? Would you have shared your military intelligence with the species you just met?" Vexillar countered, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles with an almost defensive tone. "The Zix Confederation has survived this long by being cautious. Caution is one thing. Withholding information about an imminent attack while discussing a military alliance is something else entirely." Sarah leaned forward. "Admiral Zhao is prepared to commit the 7th Fleet to the defense of Zix Prime. That's nearly a third of humanity's combat-ready ships, Ambassador. But she needs full cooperation from your military." Vexillar's posture shifted in a way Sarah couldn't interpret. "What exactly does full cooperation entail?" "Access to your defense grid, integration with your communication systems, tactical control of your orbital platforms." Sarah paused, letting the magnitude of the request sink in. "We need to coordinate our forces as one if we're going to have any chance against a Krell subjugation fleet." "Impossible," Vexillar said immediately. "The High Conclave would never allow external control of our defenses. It's unprecedented." "So is the extinction of your species," Sarah replied, more sharply than she'd intended. She took a breath, modulating her tone. "Ambassador, I understand your reluctance, but this isn't just about trust. It's about survival. The Krell don't take prisoners, and they don't accept surrender. You know this." Vexillar's 4 eyes blinked in rapid, discordant patterns. I must consult with my government." "You have 8 hours," Sarah said. "That's how long before the Thunderchild and its battle group need to depart if they're going to reach Zix Prime in time." As the ambassador hurried away, Commander Torres stepped into the conference room. He'd clearly been monitoring the conversation. "You believe him?" he asked quietly. Sarah rubbed her temples. "I believe he's scared. Beyond that," she shook her head, "there's something we're missing." "I've been reviewing what little we know about Zix history," Torres said, taking the seat. "Did you know they've claimed to be neutral in 3 previous interstellar conflicts? Yet somehow, they've always ended up on the winning side, just in time to share in the spoils." Sarah frowned. "You think this is some kind of ploy?" "I think that a species doesn't survive as long as the Zix have by being naive. They've played both sides before. Maybe they're doing it again." The thought troubled Sarah deeply. If the Zix were secretly negotiating with the Krell as well, the entire human fleet could be flying into a trap. 6 hours later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Olive Branch, watching as a Zix cruiser dropped out of FTL near their position. It was sleeker than human vessels, with an organic quality to its design that made it seem almost grown rather than built. "They're hailing us," the communications officer reported. "On screen." Sarah ordered. The display revealed not Ambassador Vexillar, but a different Zix. This one had darker scale patterns and wore what appeared to be a military insignia. "Captain Chen, I am General Kovacs of the Zix Defense Force. I understand you have made certain requests of our government." Sarah straightened. "The situation is urgent, General. The Krell. We are aware of the Krell fleet movements, Kovacs interrupted. What you may not be aware of is that this will not be our first encounter with the subjugation fleet. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah exchanged a glance with Torres. Your records indicate no direct conflicts with the Krell, she said carefully. Kovacs made a gesture that the translation software couldn't interpret. Our official records, yes. There is much about the Zix that we do not share with outsiders, Captain. But circumstances force our hand. The general's tone shifted. We have agreed to your admiral's conditions with one addition. I will be stationed aboard the Thunderchild as liaison and observer. Admiral Zhu's face appeared on a second screen, her expression inscrutable. Acceptable, if the general understands that tactical decisions remain under human command. Kovacs inclined his head. Of course, Admiral. We may have secrets, but we are not fools. The Thunderchild represents military technology beyond our current capabilities. We recognize the value of your experience. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah found herself aboard the Thunderchild once more, this time as part of a joint human-Zix command team. The massive battleship had transformed from diplomatic showpiece to war machine, its corridors now filled with troops preparing for combat and technicians making final adjustments to weapon systems. In the Strategic Operations Center, Admiral Zhou stood before a holographic display showing the projected course of the Krell fleet. Beside her, General Kovacs provided information about Zix defensive capabilities and the layout of their home system. The Krell will likely emerge here, Kovacs indicated a point at the edge of the system, where the gravitational interference is minimal. Their standard tactic is to deploy immediately into combat formation and launch fighter screens. How many ships are we facing? Sarah asked. Based on our long-range scans, approximately 75 capital ships, including 3 dreadnoughts, plus support vessels and fighter squadrons. Admiral Zhou replied grimly. Even with the Zix defense forces, we're outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. Sarah felt a chill. The largest human engagement so far had involved fewer than 50 capital ships total on both sides. Then we need a force multiplier, Torres said, speaking up from his station. Something they won't expect. Admiral Zhou nodded. That's where the Thunderchild comes in. General Kovacs, we need to discuss the quantum displacement cannon. The Zix general's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. The weapon we observed during your demonstration. It's more than just a weapon, Zhou explained. It creates a localized distortion in space-time. Anything caught in its effect is shifted slightly out of phase with normal reality. The effect is temporary, but while it lasts, the target can neither move nor fire, essentially frozen in time. Kovac's breathing vents fluttered. Such technology. The power requirements must be enormous. They are, Zhou confirmed. The Thunderchild can fire the TDC exactly 3 times before its power core requires a complete reset, a process that takes hours we won't have in battle. Sarah understood immediately. 3 shots, 3 Krell dreadnoughts. Precisely, Zhou said. But we'll need to get close, danger close, for maximum effectiveness. And we'll need the Zix fleet to create that opportunity. General Kovacs stared at the holographic display, all 4 eyes fixed on the representation of the incoming Krell Armada. You're proposing to use your most advanced warship as bait, he said finally. Admiral Zhu's expression hardened. I'm proposing to win, General, at any cost. The briefing continued, details of the battle plan emerging with each passing hour. The human Zix fleet would form a defensive perimeter around the inhabited planets. The Thunderchild would position itself just behind the front line, protected but ready to advance when the moment came. If they could disable the 3 Krell dreadnoughts, the balance of firepower would shift just enough to give them a fighting chance. Just as the meeting was concluding, an alert sounded throughout the ship. A junior officer burst into the command center. Admiral, priority message from our forward scouts. The Krell fleet has increased speed. New estimated arrival at 6 prime. 14 hours. The room fell silent, They had expected 3 more days to prepare. "They know we're coming," Torres said quietly. Admiral Zhu's face betrayed no emotion as she turned to General Kovacs. "It seems, General, that the Krell have better intelligence about your system than you led us to believe. I think it's time you told us what you're really hiding at 6 Prime." General Kovacs's 4 eyes blinked in an asynchronous pattern that Sarah had come to recognize as extreme discomfort. The command center had gone deathly quiet, with both human and Zix officers watching the confrontation unfold. "Admiral," Kovacs said finally, "what I am about to share violates every security protocol of the Confederation." He gestured toward the doors. "This information requires privacy." Admiral Zhao nodded sharply. "Clear the room. Essential personnel only." As officers filed out, she added, "Captain Chen and Commander Torres stay." When the doors sealed shut, Kovacs activated a small device on his wrist guard. A faint hum filled the air, some kind of localized jamming field. "What I tell you cannot leave this room," the general began. 32 years ago by your Earth calendar, the Krell didn't discover the Zix Confederation by chance. We contacted them." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Beside her, Torres stiffened. "You reached out to the Krell." Admiral Zhu's voice was deadly calm. "Knowing their history of conquest." "We knew nothing then," Kovacs replied, defensive scales rising along his neck. "The Krell presented themselves as traders and explorers. They offered technology, medicine, knowledge. By the time we understood their true nature, they had already established outposts throughout our territory." "Let me guess," Torres said bitterly. "Rather than fight, you made a deal." Kovacs's breathing vents fluttered rapidly. The Conclave believed they had no choice. The Krell demanded resources, access to our shipping lanes, and, he hesitated, test subjects. "Test subjects," Sarah echoed, horrified. "The Krell are obsessed with understanding other species' biology. Their scientists claimed it was to help develop medical treatments adapted to our physiology. The Conclave later discovered they were weaponizing the research, creating biological agents specific to each species they encountered." Admiral Zhu's expression darkened. "And the Conclave allowed this. They limited the number of volunteers," Kovacs said, the translator unable to convey the full bitterness in his voice. "Criminals, mostly. Later, political dissidents. A sacrifice to protect the many, they claimed. Until humans appeared," Sarah guessed, the pieces falling into place. Kovacs bowed his head in affirmation. "When your species not only resisted the Krell but began to win battles, everything changed. A resistance movement formed within our military. We began sabotaging Krell operations, feeding them false intelligence, while appearing to maintain our agreements. And now they know." Torres said, "Yes. A Krell operative uncovered evidence of our duplicity 3 weeks ago. This fleet isn't just coming to prevent our alliance with humans. It's coming to make an example of us." Kovacs's voice dropped. "But that isn't why they accelerated their approach. They're coming for the vault." "The vault?" Admiral Zhao repeated. Kovacs touched his device again, and a holographic projection appeared. A massive underground structure beneath one of Zix Prime's polar regions. "For decades, we've been collecting and analyzing Krell technology, searching for weaknesses. The vault contains everything we've learned about their biology, their ships, their weapons." He paused meaningfully. "And their communications encryption." Admiral Zhu's eyes widened slightly, the most surprise Sarah had ever seen her display. "You can decode their transmissions and not all, but enough to anticipate some of their movements. Enough to have given your colonies at Proxima Centauri advance warning, if the Conclave had allowed it." Torres took a half-step forward, fists clenched. "You knew about Proxima. You could have prevented." "Commander." Admiral Zhu's voice cut through the room like a blade. Torres stepped back, though rage still burned in his eyes. Sarah fought to keep her own emotions in check. "If the Krell capture this vault, they'll know exactly what you know about them. Every advantage, every countermeasure. And they'll know what information we've already passed to humans. Kovacs confirmed. Your defensive preparations, your colony locations, all compromised. Before anyone could respond, the ship's alert system activated. A voice echoed through the command center. Admiral Zhao, to the bridge. Priority signal from Earth Command. The look that passed between Zhu and Sarah conveyed volumes. Something else had gone wrong. On the bridge, a grim-faced officer transferred the transmission to the main screen. The weathered features of Fleet Admiral Santiago, head of Earth's Combined Defense Forces, appeared before them. Helen, he said without preamble, we've lost contact with the Dakota outpost. Last transmission reported Krell signatures approaching from the Cygnus direction. Admiral Zhou's posture remained rigid, but Sarah saw her hands tighten on the command console. Dakota is on the opposite side of human space from Zix territory, she said. They're attacking on 2 fronts. 3, Santiago corrected. We're getting reports of Krell activity near the Epsilon Eridani colony as well. His eyes narrowed as he noticed Kovacs. I see the Zix are with you. Interesting timing for this coordinated Krell offensive, wouldn't you say? Kovacs stepped forward. Admiral Santiago, I've just shared information with your officers that explains this escalation. The Krell have discovered our resistance efforts and... Save it, Santiago cut him off. Right now, I need to know if this is a diversion, or if the Zix fleet is the diversion. Helen, the Security Council is divided. Half want you to abandon the Zix and return to defend our core systems. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Humanity faced attacks on multiple fronts, and here they were, committing a third of their fleet to protect aliens who had, by their own admission, collaborated with the enemy. Admiral Zhao was silent for a long moment, her eyes moving from Santiago to Kovacs to the tactical display, showing the approaching Krell armada. The Zix have a facility containing critical intelligence on Krell technology and communications, she said finally. If it falls, every human world becomes more vulnerable. We're proceeding to Zix Prime. Santiago's expression remained grave. The Council has authorized me to deploy the Orion. A hush fell over the bridge. The Orion, sister ship to the Thunderchild, but equipped with experimental technology still considered too unstable for regular deployment. Admiral, Santiago continued, initial calculations suggest that if both the Thunderchild and the Orion were to activate their QDCs simultaneously within close proximity, the overlapping fields could create a cascade effect. The power requirements would be astronomical, Zhao said quietly, and the risk of spatial fracturing. Desperate times, Helen. The Orion is on its way to your position, maximum burn. You'll have 48 hours to develop a joint operation plan. The Krell will reach Zix Prime in less than 14 hours, Zhao countered. Santiago's face hardened. Then hold the line until reinforcements arrive. Santiago out. As the transmission ended, Admiral Zhou turned to Sarah. Captain, I need you to work with Kovacs. Find out everything about this vault, defenses, access points, extraction protocols. If we can't hold the planet, we need to ensure that David doesn't fall into Krell hands. And, if we can, Sarah asked, then we'll have 2 Valkyrie-class battleships with the most powerful weapons humanity has ever created. Zhao's eyes fixed on the tactical display, where the Krell fleet loomed ever closer. And we'll find out if our desperation has made us clever or simply reckless. As Sarah led Kovacs from the bridge, she noticed Torres following them, his expression still thunderous. The revelation that the Zix could have prevented the massacre at Proxima had clearly struck a deep wound. Commander, she said quietly, I need you focused on the mission. They let thousands of humans die, he replied, voice tight with controlled fury. And now we're supposed to trust them with the survival of both our species. From behind them, a new voice spoke. Sometimes, Commander, trust has nothing to do with it. Sarah turned to see Admiral Zhou, who had followed them into the corridor. The Krell are coming, Zhou continued, not just for the Zix, but for all of us. And now we know they've committed most of their fleet to this offensive. A cold smile touched her lips, which means this isn't just about defending Zix Prime anymore. This is our chance to deal the Krell a blow they won't recover from. Understanding dawned on Sarah. You never intended just to defend, she said softly. You're planning to use the Thunderchild and the Orion to counterattack. Zhu's eyes gleamed with fierce determination. Captain, I'm planning to end this war. 6 hours later, Sarah stood in the Thunderchild's observation deck, watching as the combined human Zix fleet formed up around the massive battleship. Through the viewport, she could see Zix Prime, a blue-green world partially obscured by swirling cloud systems, its night side dotted with the lights of cities. Cities filled with civilians who had no idea how close extinction loomed. Beautiful, isn't it? General Kovacs said, joining her. Worth protecting. Sarah glanced at him. Even after what your government did. Sacrificing your own people to the Krell. Especially because of that, he replied quietly. Those of us in the Resistance, we fight not just against the Krell, but against becoming like them. Their conversation was interrupted as Commander Torres arrived, his expression tight but controlled. Admiral Zhou requests your presence on the bridge. Long-range sensors have detected the Krell fleet dropping out of FTL at the system's edge. As they hurried through the corridors, Sarah felt the ship's atmosphere change. The calm efficiency of training gave way to the electric tension of impending combat. Crew members moved with purpose, battle stations were manned, and the distant sound of the weapons systems powering up vibrated through the hull. On the bridge, Admiral Zhou stood before the tactical display, her face illuminated by the holographic representation of the incoming enemy fleet. She didn't look up as they entered. 78 capital ships, she reported. 3 dreadnoughts as expected. They're deploying in a standard hemispherical formation. Fighter screens launching. Sarah studied the display. The Krell ships, angular, predatory designs with biological elements integrated into their hulls, were spreading out in a practiced formation designed to envelop their targets. What's our status? She asked. The Orion is still 37 hours out, Zhao replied. We hold alone until then. Or we retreat, Torres suggested, though his tone made clear he didn't expect that order. Negative, Commander. The vault is our primary objective now. Zhou turned to Kovacs. How long to extract the critical data? The download process has begun, but the security protocols require authentication from members of the High Conclave. We estimate 5 hours for complete transfer to secure drives. Zhou's expression hardened. We don't have 5 hours. The Krell will breach our defensive line in 3, maybe less. Then we need to buy time. Sarah said, an idea forming in her mind. General, could a small team access the vault directly and extract the most critical data manually? Kovacs's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Possible, but risky. The facility is designed to self-destruct if compromised. That might become necessary anyway, Zhao noted grimly. Captain Chen, what are you suggesting? AA strike team. Drop us behind our lines while the fleet engages the Krell. We extract the most valuable intelligence, particularly their communication codes, and transmit it to the Thunderchild. Zhou considered this, and the Thunderchild becomes the bait we discussed earlier, but with a twist. Sarah indicated the tactical display. The Krell believe this is a defensive action. They don't know about the Orion. If we can decode even some of their communications in real time, we could feed them false information. Zhao finished, a cold smile touching her lips. Lure their dreadnoughts into a trap of our own making. The plan came together quickly. Sarah would lead a strike team including Torres and Kovacs to the vault, while the human Zix fleet engaged the Krell in a fighting retreat, appearing to defend the planet while actually drawing the enemy into an optimal position. If they could extract the Krell communication codes, the Thunderchild could transmit false orders to the enemy fleet, positioning their dreadnoughts for maximum effect when the Orion arrived. It was desperate, dangerous, and relied on too many variables for comfort. But it was the only plan they had. 2 hours later, Sarah's shuttle screamed through Zix Prime's atmosphere, evasive maneuvers throwing her against her restraints as Krell fighters strafed their position. Through the viewports, she could see the space battle raging above, energy weapons cutting brilliant paths through the darkness, explosions blooming like silent flowers as ships on both sides were hit. Approaching the coordinates, the pilot called. LZ is hot. The shuttle touched down hard amid the wind-swept ice of the polar region. As the ramp lowered, Sarah led her team out into the biting cold, weapons ready. Ahead, partially concealed in a glacial formation, stood the entrance to the vault, a massive door of unknown metal, inscribed with Zix symbols. Kovacs moved forward, placing his hand on a scanning panel. Authentication process begun. Stand ready. The Krell will have detected our landing. As if summoned by his words, the scream of approaching fighters cut through the howling wind. Torres hefted a shoulder-mounted missile launcher, his face grim but determined. "Captain," he said, "get inside with the general. We'll hold them off." Sarah hesitated, reluctant to leave her people exposed. But knowing the mission came first. The door to the vault slid open with a grinding sound of ancient mechanisms, revealing the dimly lit corridor stretching deep underground. Inside, Kovacs led her through a labyrinth of chambers filled with alien technology, some recognizably Krell, others of unknown origin. Finally, they reached a central room dominated by a crystalline structure that pulsed with soft blue light. "The data core," Kovacs explained. "Everything the Zix have learned about the Krell in 3 decades of study." Sarah connected her communication device to an interface Kovacs indicated. "How do we find the encryption codes?" "Allow me." Kovacs manipulated a series of controls, and patterns of light shifted within the crystal. "I'm isolating the communications data now." Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of combat as Torres and his team engaged the Krell forces. Time was running out. "Upload at 30%, Sarah reported, watching the data flow into her device. "How much longer?" Before Kovacs could answer, an explosion shook the facility. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. "They've breached the outer defenses," Kovacs said, his normally calm voice tight with tension. 47%. 52%. Sarah's communicator crackled to life. "Captain." Torres's voice came through, strained and punctuated by weapons fire. "We're being overrun. Multiple Krell ground forces incoming." "Hold position, Commander," she ordered. "We're almost." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Sarah met Kovacs's four-eyed gaze. 73%, she said. "Close enough. We need to move." They raced back through the complex, the sounds of combat growing louder with each passing second. As they reached the final corridor before the exit, Sarah activated her comm link to the Thunderchild. "Admiral, this is Chen. We have the encryption data. Transmitting now." Zhou's voice came through clearly despite the battle raging in orbit. "Received, Captain. The Krell dreadnoughts are moving into position, just as we hoped." A pause. "Be advised, we've detected a new signal from the largest dreadnought. They're deploying something we haven't seen before. Can you identify it?" "Negative, but energy readings are off the charts." "Whatever it is, Captain, you need to get off that planet. Now." They emerged from the vault into chaos. The shuttle was a smoking wreck, and Torres and his team were engaged in a desperate firefight with Krell ground forces, towering insectoid creatures wielding energy weapons that cut through the ice and rock with terrifying ease. "Captain." Torres spotted them and provided covering fire as they sprinted toward his position. "The shuttle's gone. We need an alternate extraction." Sarah scanned the battlefield, mind racing. "Admiral, we need emergency evac. Any available craft?" "Negative, Captain." Zhou's voice was grim. "All ships are engaged. We can't break through their lines for extraction." It was in that moment, as hope seemed to fade, that Sarah noticed Kovacs manipulating a device on his wrist guard. Not the jamming field from earlier, but something else. Something he was trying to conceal. "General," she said sharply, "what are you doing?" Kovex's 4 eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the diplomatic facade or military discipline. Pure desperation. "Forgive me, Captain," he said softly. "There's something I haven't told you." Before she could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered. Not from an explosion this time, but from something massive moving below the ice. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, drowning out even the sounds of battle. "What's happening?" Torres demanded, firing a burst at an advancing Krell warrior. "The true reason the Krell want the vault," Kovex said, his voice strangely calm now. "It was never just about the intelligence we gathered. It was about what we found beneath it." The ice around them began to crack, massive fissures spreading outward from where they stood. Sarah grabbed Torres's arm for balance as the ground heaved. "Admiral," she shouted into her comm, "something's happening on the surface. Some kind of." Her words died as the ice split open completely, revealing not natural rock beneath, but a vast metallic structure. It rose from its frozen tomb like some ancient Leviathan awakening, dwarfing the human shuttle, dwarfing even the Thunderchild itself. "By all the stars," Torres whispered. Through her still-open comlink, Sarah heard Admiral Zhao's voice, filled with awe and disbelief. "Captain, the readings we're getting, that's not Six technology. That's not Krell technology either." Kovex stood before the rising colossus, arms spread wide. "No, Admiral. This is something much older. Something the Krell fear more than any human battleship." As the massive vessel continued its ascent, breaking free from the ice that had concealed it for centuries, Sarah finally understood the true reason for the Zix Confederation's survival and why the Krell had accelerated their attack. This wasn't just about stopping an alliance between humans and Zix. This was about preventing the awakening of something that could change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. "Captain Chen," Kovex said, turning to her with all 4 eyes gleaming, "allow me to introduce you to the Ancient Harbinger, the last warship of those who came before us all, and our true reason for reaching out to humanity." The Ancient Harbinger hung in space above Zix Prime, its vast form dwarfing even the Krell dreadnoughts. From the bridge of the Thunderchild, Admiral Zhao watched in stunned silence as the ancient vessel's systems activated one by one, segments of its hull illuminating with a soft blue glow that reminded Sarah of the data core in the vault. "Our ancestors discovered it buried beneath the polar ice 5 centuries ago," Kovex explained. "They had been evacuated from the surface just moments before by a Zix shuttle that seemed to respond directly to the General's commands. The technology was beyond our comprehension, still is in many ways. But over generations, we learned to interface with some of its basic systems. All this time," Sarah said, "we thought the Thunderchild was the most advanced ship in this region of space." Kovex made a gesture that his species used to indicate humility. "Your vessel is remarkable, Captain, but the Harbinger was built by a civilization that disappeared 50,000 years ago. The Forerunners, as we call them, fought the early Krell and vanished shortly after defeating them." On the tactical display, they could see the Krell fleet's reaction to the Harbinger's emergence. Their perfect formation had dissolved into chaos, ships breaking ranks, some even attempting to jump to FTL, despite the gravitational interference. "They recognize it," Torres observed, his earlier anger toward the Zix seemingly forgotten in the face of this revelation. "The Krell have a genetic memory," Kovex confirmed. "Knowledge passed down through their biological structure. The sight of a Forerunner vessel triggers a primal fear response, like your Earth mammals confronting their ancient predators." Admiral Zhu's eyes remained fixed on the display. "They're retreating." Indeed, the Krell fleet was pulling back, abandoning their attack formations and regrouping at the system's edge. The 3 massive dreadnoughts, however, maintained their positions, their weapons systems still trained on the human Zix forces. "Not all of them," Sarah noted. "The dreadnoughts are staying." Kvex manipulated the controls on his wrist device again. The Harbinger's offensive capabilities are still largely dormant. We've managed to activate its shields and some basic propulsion, but the weapons systems have safeguards we've never broken. Then we stick to the plan, Zhao decided, her voice regaining its commanding edge. Captain Chin, Commander Torres, the encryption codes you recovered. Can we use them? Sarah checked her device, where the data from the vault was still being processed. 78% decoded, Admiral. We're getting fragments of their communications now. Torres leaned over a communication station, working with the officer there to implement the codes. They're discussing whether to continue the attack, he reported after a moment. The Dreadnought commanders are arguing with someone called the Executor. They believe the Harbinger is non-functional, just a relic. Good, Zhao said, a cold smile touching her lips. Let's encourage that belief. She turned to her communications officer. Prepare a false transmission using the Krell encryption. Order the Dreadnoughts to advance and target the Harbinger. Kvex's 4 eyes widened in alarm. Admiral, if they concentrate fire on the ancient vessel before we fully activate its defenses, they won't get the chance. Zhao interrupted, checking the chronometer. The Orion will arrive in 27 minutes, if we can position those dreadnoughts correctly. Understanding dawned on Sarah. You're still planning to use the quantum displacement cannons. 2 Valkyrie-class battleships, firing synchronized QDCs at targets already destabilized by their proximity to a Forerunner vessel. Zhao nodded. Our scientists predict the space-time distortion would be significant. The next 20 minutes passed in tense preparation. Using the partially decoded Krell communications, they transmitted false orders to the dreadnoughts, subtly maneuvering them into a triangular formation facing the Harbinger. On the ancient vessel itself, Kvex coordinated with Zix engineers to strengthen its shields, drawing on knowledge accumulated through centuries of study. Admiral, the sensor officer called, detecting a quantum signature matching the Orion. Emergence in 5 minutes. Zhao nodded. All ships, prepare to execute maneuver Theta 6 on my mark. The Thunderchild will advance to position Alpha. Sarah watched as the massive battleship broke formation, moving with surprising grace for its size. The Thunderchild would position itself opposite from where the Orion would emerge, creating a crossfire with the Krell dreadnoughts caught in the middle. They're getting suspicious, Torres reported from the communication station. The lead dreadnought is demanding verification codes we don't have. Doesn't matter now, Zhao replied. They're in position. Weapon status. QDC at full charge, Admiral. Targeting solutions locked on all 3 dreadnoughts. On the tactical display, a new signature appeared as the Orion emerged from FTL, its dark hull identical to the Thunderchild's but bearing different markings. It immediately oriented itself toward the Krell formation. The Orion is signaling ready, Admiral, the communications officer reported. Hu took a deep breath. All ships, execute Theta 6. Thunderchild and Orion, fire QDCs on my mark. 3, 2, 1, fire. The effect was immediate and more dramatic than anyone had predicted. As both human battleships fired their quantum displacement cannons simultaneously, the fabric of space itself seemed to ripple between them. The 3 Krell dreadnoughts, caught in the convergence of the fields, appeared to stretch and distort, their hulls elongating impossibly before snapping back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, cracks of brilliant energy began spreading across the dreadnoughts' hulls. Secondary explosions followed, cascading from system to system as the vessel's own power sources destabilized. What's happening? Sarah asked, awed by the destruction unfolding before them. The overlapping displacement fields created a quantum resonance, Zhao explained, her own voice tinged with wonder. It's causing their molecular structure to vibrate out of phase with normal matter. The destruction of the dreadnoughts sent a visible shockwave through the remaining Krell fleet. Without waiting for orders, the alien vessels began jumping to FTL, abandoning the battlefield entirely. "They're retreating," Torres said, disbelief evident in his voice. "All of them." A cheer erupted across the bridge, quickly spreading throughout the ship. Sarah felt the tension of the past days finally beginning to release. They had done it, survived against impossible odds, and dealt the Krell a blow they would not soon forget. Hours later, as the human and Zix fleets established a defensive perimeter around the system, Sarah found herself in a conference room aboard the Thunderchild with Admiral Joe, Commander Torres, and General Kovacs. On the table between them sat a small data crystal, a copy of the complete vault archives, safely extracted before the facility was secured. "This alliance," Zhao said, addressing Kovacs, "it began with deception." The Zix general inclined his head. "Yes, Admiral. My government believed humans would not help if you knew our full history with the Krell." "They were wrong," Sarah interjected. "Understanding why the Krell targeted you makes the alliance more logical, not less." "Perhaps," Kovacs acknowledged. "But fear rarely produces logical decisions. My people have lived in fear for generations, first of the Krell, then of our own government's choices." Torres, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "The people who died at Proxima Centauri and other colonies, that can't be undone." "No," Kovacs agreed, his voice solemn. "It cannot, and that debt can never be fully repaid. But perhaps, with what we've learned from the Vault and the Harbinger, we can ensure no more humans, or Zix, need die at Krell hands." Admiral Joe considered this. "The Security Council will want the Harbinger studied by human scientists as well." "Of course," Kovacs said. "That was always our intention. The resistance within our military has been planning this revelation for years, waiting for the right allies." He gestured toward the viewport, where the ancient vessel was visible in the distance. "The Forerunners built it to be operated by multiple species working in concert. We believe that was their strength, and why they initially defeated the Krell, who cannot conceive of true cooperation." As the discussion continued, outlining the first steps of a genuine alliance between humans and the Zix Confederation, Sarah found herself repeatedly drawn to the view of the two battleships flanking the ancient vessel, the Thunderchild and the Orion, products of human ingenuity and determination, alongside a relic of a civilization long vanished. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Joint Command Station, orbiting a neutral system halfway between Earth and Zix Prime. Below her, officers and technicians from both species worked side by side, analyzing data from the Harbinger and coordinating the integrated fleet operations that had pushed the Krell back on all fronts. "Captain Chen," a familiar voice called. She turned to see Commander Torres, now Captain Torres of the Orion, approaching with a data tablet. "The latest reports from the front. The Krell have abandoned 3 more systems." Sarah took the tablet, scanning the information with satisfaction. "The communication codes are still working." "Better than ever," Torres confirmed. "Kovacs's team has expanded the decryption algorithms. We're intercepting nearly 80% of their transmissions now." "And the other matter." Torres lowered his voice. "The first joint research team boards the Harbinger next week. Early scans suggest they may have located the weapons control systems." Sarah nodded, turning back to the viewport. In the distance, the Thunderchild was visible, running maneuvers with a mixed squadron of human and Zix vessels. Its dark hull no longer seemed ominous to her, but reassuring, a symbol of how far they had come and how much had changed. "You know," Torres said, following her gaze, "I never thought I'd say this after Proxima, but I'm glad Admiral Joe decided to bring the fleet to Zix Prime that day." "So am I," Sarah agreed, though I doubt even she could have predicted how it would turn out. Torres smiled slightly. "I heard she's been nominated for Fleet Admiral. Santiago is stepping down." "Well deserved," Sarah said. Her gamble saved 2 civilizations and might have turned the tide of the entire war. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the ships move through their precise formations. Finally, Torres spoke again. General Kovacs told me something interesting yesterday. Apparently, the Zix have an ancient legend about the Forerunners, that they didn't vanish, but rather seeded themselves among other promising species, waiting for the day when the galaxy would need them again. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You believe that? I don't know, Torres admitted, but I do know that when the Thunderchild first appeared over their world, the Zix were shocked not just by its power, but by how similar some of its design elements were to the Harbinger. He shrugged. Convergent evolution, maybe. Or perhaps we all carry something of the Forerunners in us, the capacity to stand against impossible odds and prevail. As if on cue, the Thunderchild completed its maneuvers and executed a perfect turn, its massive form silhouetted against the system's sun. No longer a solitary defender, but part of something greater, a union of species and technologies that the Krell had never anticipated and could not comprehend. Either way, Sarah said, watching the human battleship that had started it all, I think we're about to show the Krell what happens when they underestimate what different species can accomplish together. In the vastness of space, as the integrated fleet prepared for the next phase of operations, the Thunderchild fired its engines, leading the formation onward, not just a weapon of war, but a herald of something new, something the galaxy hadn't seen in 50,000 years. Hope.